Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Good evening to you and welcome to this Thursday edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. Now, from the very first time calls were made for a basic income grant to help less fortunate South Africans, the big question has always been, where will the money come from? Well, the government has now put forward a proposal. It wants you and the company you work for or own to pay 12% of your earnings into a state-managed fund. The fund, of course, will not only take care of the basic income grant, it's part of a wider reform initiative that's supposed to provide for retirement, disability, and unemployment benefits. The person driving this process on behalf of the government is on standby to take us through it all. And listening in will be voices that have been advocating for some of these changes, as well as those who, after taking a cursory look at the government's proposal, believe we have a lot to worry about still. That and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. The Department of Social Development yesterday gazetted a new green paper on comprehensive social security and retirement reform. Among the proposals, taxpayers to fork out up to 12% of their earnings. The first 10% of this contribution will be channeled through to a mandatory fund rather than to a private sector retirement fund, and the DDG is going to tell us why. The other 2% will go towards unemployment insurance. And people earning 22,320 rands per year or less won't have to contribute. The paper also proposing that a basic income grant for the unemployed, as well as an extension of the UIF benefits. It also proposes a scheme that will replace the road accident fund and provide income benefits to claimants. For more on this, let's now welcome the Deputy Director General of the National Department of Social Development, the person responsible for social security in that department, and that is Ms. Brenda Sibeko. Good evening, DDG, and thanks very much for your time. This, of course, many people who have been in the government system would know, stakeholders would know, as well as journalists who have been covering these things would also know that this has been in the making for a very, very long time. 15 years ago, the former minister responsible for social development, Ms. Batabile Dlamini, spoke about this, and last year we were told, I think it was around November, that this green paper was almost ready. So it has taken many, many years indeed to get to this point.
Yes, good evening, Vuyo, and everyone that is watching and listening. Apologies that my video is not working properly. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can, loudly and clearly.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, it's true. This has been in the making for very many years. And some of the proposals that are in this green paper actually were contained in the Taylor report of 2002. And we have taken this length of time to implement some of those proposals. There's been a little bit of progress with regards to the social assistance framework or the social grants, so to speak. But the other elements have taken much, much longer to move along. And part of why we're now releasing the paper and saying, let's get South Africans to discuss this and engage on it and agree as a nation on what is the approach that we want to have as a nation on the social security system for the country is because of what we have recently experienced. You will recall that before COVID, there were already very high levels of unemployment in the country. There was already high levels of poverty and inequality. And And what we were experiencing was we saw that many more people ended up really poor, and we had then to intervene through the government's social relief of distress grant,
Okay.
and also through other
Didi,
social security interventions, such as what the
barge in.
Unemployment
Didi,
Insurance Fund introduced.
okay, Didi, can you hear me? We're going to take a quick ad break so that we can fix both your sound and the picture. This conversation is going to continue in a short while. On the line, we have the DDG responsible for social security in the Department of Social Development, and she is taking us through these developments. Yesterday, that department tabling a green paper, which, among other things, is going to ask you to pay up to 12% of your earnings into a state-managed fund that's going to address several issues, including the basic income grant. We're going to continue with that conversation in a minute. Don't go away.
Okay.
Okay, while we're still trying to get that line sorted out, a short while ago, about an hour ago, our sister program had a conversation with the DDG at Treasury, Ismail Momoniat, about this development. Have a listen to what he had to say.
This paper is an aspirational paper. It's been years in the making. And in around, I think, 2014-15, government put out a paper which has been discussed at NADLAC. And what you have is a paper with many proposals. Many of those proposals still haven't been tested for how they would fit into any fiscal framework. They haven't been tested against the current system. And so it's just a set of proposals. There's, business, labor, community, other government departments. They've all put forward these proposals. Government hasn't specifically approved any of these proposals. And this has been released by the Department of Social Development. It's got lots of proposals in there which have been in the public domain, like the basic income grant. It's also got proposals on setting up a national social security fund,
which of course then suggests that this process has a long way to go still. Now, while the intention behind the state-run mandatory pension and insurance system may be noble, economist Lumkile Mondi says there needs to first be a new social contract between government and the citizens of the country that will ensure that the government uses the money for what it is actually meant for.
South Africa has to think deeply. I think we have to think deeply whether we can create a competent, effective, and efficient state, the state that will be able to address our problems. So, in my view, it's not an issue around whether something like this is possible or not. However, we know that any scheme, even if we're taxed at 50% of our income, in a society that's got solidarity, that is got a working and an effective and capacitated state, where there's national solidarity, where crime and all the issues of access, for example, to basic services like decent toilet for poor black people in rural areas, if those issues were all really being addressed, well, because government was spending its money effectively, maybe the debate could be different. By this juncture, really, it's a debate that we're having, but I think it's a misplaced debate. The debate or the thought that South Africans should be having is how do we create an effective, capable state that can confront and cut a new social compact with both sides.
Economist Lumkile Mondi there responding to the developments over the past 24 hours. The government more specifically the Social Development Department, gazetting a green paper which, among other things, it wants you to pay 12% of your earnings into a state-managed fund. That fund is going to take care of a number of things, including the basic income grant that people have been talking about. Lots of organizations, trade unions, civil society organizations have actually been calling for a basic income grant. And the question, of course, people have been asking since from the very word go was whether that was affordable, where was the money going to come from. I mean, several other organizations have actually come forward, did a bit of number crunching. Those who have been watching the program closely will recall that a couple of weeks ago, we had the Institute for Economic Justice that came forward, having done, year-long studies and consultations to say, actually, this is indeed affordable. Okay, we seem to have re-established that line with the Deputy Director General of the National Department of Social Development. She is responsible for social security and is the chief driver of this process, Ms. Brenda Sibeko. Welcome back, DDG. Hopefully, we'll be fine this time around. Now, this process, of course, I mean, to get to this point where you are now able to put on the table a green paper, you've had to consult with a lot of people. There have been conversations at NEDLEC between the government, business, civil society, and organized labor. So, in essence, we could say that what you've tabled, or what is contained in this document, is this wish list, of many things that have been put forward by virtually everybody. Would it be correct to say that?
Yes, it would be correct that we have gone through a whole lot of consultations within, the primary thing is within the NEDLEC platform, and even beforehand through the Taylor Committee when some of the original proposals were made. But it's important to say that what we've put together now has also gone through a second round of research and engagement, and we have refined some of the proposals, taking into account the input that came from the NEDLEC parties. But it's important also to say it's not the final picture. It's correct to say this is a discussion paper. It's the starting point at which we want to engage all of our South African citizens and hear what their views are about the kind of social security system that we can create in the country and how everyone in the country can be covered properly in a sustainable and reliable and affordable way for the country as a whole. So this is an engagement, really.
Okay.
And we hope that once we have had the consultations with people, we've engaged with them on this, then what we will do after December, we will then begin to refine and revise and update the proposals so that we can then take them through to the government processes for consideration. So at the moment, this is like the starting conversation with the stakeholders in South Africa as a whole.
Okay, now if it takes into account, as you've just said, what is the conversations that have been taking place at NEDLEC, what would have been other considerations? Because one would imagine that what has been happening at NEDLEC between social partners would not have been the only reason for you to revise what you had actually for years. Would things like international best practice, for example, have been, a factor? Would things like fears, about what such a proposal, would do, when people who look at, our debt, people who look at how much we owe, people who look at the state of our economy would be worried that something like this, won't put us in good stead. Would those have been some of the other considerations?
Yes, Vuyo. I think you've hit the nail on the head when you say there's been some fears and concerns which have also been expressed today, by the way, by various stakeholders. There's always a worry from people when you talk about contributions and when you talk about taxation, for example, and there's throughout the period that we've been engaging on these things, I don't think there's ever such a time when anybody would welcome any proposal that says, let's contribute more into any kind of pot. So the timing was actually very difficult to agree to, but we thought that we've been discussing this for a very long time, and we've seen now with COVID that in fact, because we've taken so long looking for just the right moment when everybody agrees and things like that, that in fact we were caught with a system that we knew a long time ago needed to have certain gaps plugged, but we didn't do the plugging of the gaps because we could not find 100% agreement with everybody. And so we thought, if we wait for another crisis, we'll end up with another 20 years past this period and still not have done the changes that we know need to happen. But the important thing is to say, let us get the whole South African community, not only the people that are inside NEDLAC or the people we have been engaging with so far. They are important stakeholders and they've helped us to refine and revise and update very many of the proposals. But ultimately, we cannot say as the Department of Social Development or even as those stakeholders that are in NEDLAC that we know exactly what each South African needs and we can design a system for them without engaging them, without getting their input. So that is why we're doing it now. And I think, for example, the 12% thing that is raised as a red flag in a way, I think it's important to assure our people that this is not going to happen tomorrow. And it's a suggestion a suggestion based on some international experience that we have garnered. We appointed the International Labour Organization to help us with quantitative modeling of how one would be able to create a social insurance system that covers everybody, what would be an appropriate contribution rate, and what is an appropriate set of benefits. And those numbers are informed by that. But they are a model that needs to be engaged with our communities. And we need to say, if we say the contribution is at the lower level, like at 8%, what kind of benefit do we get? And is that benefit adequate for our people? Or do we want higher benefits? Understanding, of course, that the higher the benefits that the country needs to provide for people, the higher the contribution will have to be. But it's also important to understand that we are not going to destroy what you already have. Our system has very significant gaps. There's a gap in terms of we don't actually have in the country currently a national pension system where everyone is able to contribute. And the majority of countries in the world that are doing well in terms of their social security system have this in place. We don't have it. What we have is the private sector with different funds for different employer groups and even union schemes that have been set up to protect workers who are in formal employment. But those workers who are either not unionized or work for employers who don't have funds actually work all of their lives without contributing, without saving for themselves. And then when they retire, they have nothing to fall back on except the old age grant. And all we know is that the old age... Pardon?
I mean, you raised quite a number of things within that very short space of time, but I mean, I just want us to take maybe a couple of them. One is the fear that this small pool, of people from which, from who we raise taxes, well, including companies, is actually, there's a sense that it is overburdened, already, and to squeeze them further is not going to help anybody. I mean, so far, just from what information you've been able to gather, will the system be able, to allay the fears, whatever you put in place, will it allay the fears of those people who are saying, but we have a small pool that is already overburdened?
Yeah. Let me explain it this way, Vuyoni. The country that we have currently is such that the people who are employed pay taxes, the normal income taxes. But we also have VAT, we also have other sources of taxes that are paid in the country. Now, for people who are in formal employment, what happens currently is that they do save, some of them, in the pension industry. So we are not saying stop contributing there, but we're also not saying contribute this proportion in addition. We are looking at saying what should be the overall social security system in the country that comprises 3 layers. First, the grant system for people who are unable to contribute anything for themselves. While they are unable to contribute for themselves, they should be funded from the tax system. That is the proposal around the basic income for everyone. And we've had a lot of conversation about it. Then a second layer, which is missing currently in the country, is a system where everyone in the country who is working contributes for themselves, and they contribute a same amount of contribution, or not amount, but a same percentage or proportion of their income into a fund, and the benefits that they are going to get are a standard set of benefits that is available to everybody or who is a contributor, and that the rules of that scheme are such that it doesn't matter which employer you work for, because the rules are the same for all the people in the country. The contribution rate is the same for everybody in the country. The benefit designs are the same for everyone who contributes. So even if you change jobs, you don't now have to look for a new fund or a new employer, or then find yourself just having to withdraw the savings that you were making in the private sector and then later on start again from scratch.
Okay.
So that is the second layer that is missing in the country. What people have is the third layer, which we are saying is very important. It must be retained. What we need to do is say, how do we strengthen that sector? How do we strengthen that layer? But the contribution that people are making currently, for example, in the private sector range, there's a range. Some people are paying 10%, some people are paying 18%, others are paying even 20% of their income into these funds. So what we are saying is we need to delineate between this mandatory scheme that everybody would contribute to and then what the private sector would also collect from people. But the important thing is to make sure that the systems are mutually supportive of each other. The mandatory system would be would be offering guaranteed benefits based on the formula that will be agreed once we've finished our consultations. That has to be agreed at that stage. And then the top up of that or the supplement of that would be what the private sector then does. So the private sector doesn't come out. People who have contributed all their lives don't lose their benefits. They retain those. We just need to say what proportion of what they were paying there can go into the mandatory guaranteed space, because the current system is not guaranteed. It depends on, how is the insurance industry performing. So when you get to retirement age, the calculation is done of this is what you've contributed, this is what how your investment has performed over the time, these are the costs, this is your benefit.
Okay.
But when you have a mandatory system, you make sure that the mandatory system offers a minimum benefit or guarantee to people so that they will not lose a portion of their contribution. And then the private sector, which is slightly more risky, will then be an additional contribution that people make. This is the arrangement that you're proposing. So we're not saying you have to contribute an additional 12% or 8% and all of that.
Okay. Now,
you have to that and then a balance between the two in a way. That's what we are suggesting.
Okay.
But also, we are talking also with the private sector. We've spoken to them. Of course, they have many, many concerns about what this is going to do to the sector. And we are very conscious that we must not make people to lose what they've contributed. We also don't want to cause instability in that industry because people have their money in there. So that needs to be protected.
Okay,
and we just need to talk about how do you then carve out the monetary contribution from that and make sure that there's a minimum benefit that everybody is able to get.
Okay. Now, we know that, this thing still has a long way to go. It's going to go to Parliament, there's going to be hearings, and everyone will get an opportunity to actually have their say. But before I let you go, just on the road accident fund, why do you feel that it is necessary to replace the current road accident fund?
Well, a social security system is meant to be about protecting you from the risk of losing income from various things. Yeah? And the large chunk of the fund should be towards providing with you with those benefits should an accident happen to you. So in the road accident fund, it's meant to be a social security fund where the whole country pools their resources and pays those people who need as and when they need benefits. The current system that we have, unfortunately, has become a system where people now still have to prove who was at fault, and therefore, based on the extent to which you can establish that your benefit is given, and that benefit, you can get a very good lawyer who will argue that you would have been a billionaire if you didn't have an accident, and therefore your benefit is higher. If you're poorer and you don't have a good lawyer, then you get a smaller benefit. So what we are saying is we need to create an equitable system that is fair to everybody, that is affordable, and does not pay inordinate amounts of money to people on the basis of how good their lawyers are. And also that we have to make sure that the majority of the money does not go necessarily to lawyers and intermediaries, but it goes to actually the people who have experienced an accident, so that we get better benefits to them rather than a less chunk of it going into administration and legal fees and all of those sorts of things. So we want to put it under the Social Security umbrella and have rules that are the same for everybody, so that it's equitable.
Okay, DDG, that's where we're going to leave it, unfortunately. I wish we had more time. The Deputy Director General in the Department of Social Development, Ms. Brenda Sibeko. After the break, voices that have been advocating for some of these changes, as well as those who, after looking at some of the proposals, believe we have a lot to worry about still. Don't go away. Welcome back, and if you just joined us, we were talking earlier to the Deputy Director General of the Social Development Department. This after the government yesterday tabled a set of proposals that may mean you may have to pay 12%, up to 12%, I should say, of your earnings into a state-managed fund. That fund will not only take care of the basic income grant, it's also part of wider reform initiatives that are supposed to provide for retirement, disability, and unemployment benefits. Let's welcome now Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute's Isabel Fry. Joining her are SAFTU General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, as well as Center of Economic Development and Transformation Director Duma Gubule, as well as the Efficient Group's Chief Economist Davi Ruot. Good evening to all of you, and thanks very much for coming through. I'm going to start with you, Isabel. I mean, you have been calling for the basic income grant. Is what you are seeing in this green paper what you had in mind?
Good evening to you and also to the rest of the panel and the listeners. Absolutely. I think that the Green Paper is an incredible statement of faith by the Department of Social Development on behalf of Cabinet in the extent of the reforms that are on the table, starting with the basic income grant to ensure that people have sufficient to meet their basic needs, to rebuild the economy from below, and ending up with a comprehensive national social security fund that will ensure that everybody's needs from the cradle to the grave are dealt with and are made available. So this work, in effect, concludes some of the initial thinking that was started in 2002 with the Taylor Report. And Comrade Zwelinzima Vavi and I think in those days, first met around the Taylor Report recommendations. The Green Paper is the start of the discussion, and in it, the Department of Social Development has set out a number of options that they're seeking to have discussion around. What my institute, SPI, and various others are saying is that of the options, the one of the basic income grant, a universal basic income grant at 1,268 Rand, which is the upper bound poverty line, would be the foundation for what we need in order to rebuild the economy and rebuild our society.
Zwelinzima Vavi, you're among those organizations that had been arguing that the basic income grant was affordable. Is what is being proposed, does it fall short or exceed your expectations?
Well, I think the first thing we must do is to celebrate, and that finally there is a document out of the government processes onto the table for us to discuss as society. This is hugely important and historical. We've been onto this ball, as you know, since 2000, excuse me, since 2002, with the publication of the Taylor Commission report. For years, the Treasury have succeeded to block any discussion of this kind. During the days of Zola Square, they succeeded. They blocked it effectively during the days of Batabile Dlamini. And finally, with the new minister, Lindiwe Zulu, the document is out. Congratulations to the department and to her. And I guess that the crisis that is unfolding would have emboldened the progressives inside the government to force a discussion of this kind. There was a massive upheavals in the country on the 9th, 12th of July, and South Africa is the headquarters of protest action. We've seen more than 5 big protest action a day, precisely because of the levels of poverty in our country. 2/3 of our population is living below a poverty line. And so this is absolutely historical. We are excited that finally we will engage with a concrete green paper to debate this and to criticize it, to hopefully improve it further. First, the second thing I must say, though, is that the 12,000 is out of the question. I mean, the 12% is out of the question for South African workers. You remember, we're talking here about what we call a huge number of the working poor, workers who are working every day, but who are still part of the majority of the poor population of this country. There's just no way that the South African workers whose median salary, the black women in particular, is still at around 2,500, if my memory serves me well. That's just, how do you even expect them that they will put aside an extra 12%? And that's why we now reiterated the calls we have been making from time immemorial that South Africa do.
Okay, we hope we'll be able
to... Well, in mind that the 90%, sorry?
No, we lost you there for a few seconds.
Bearing in mind that 10% of the population is occupying 90% of the wealth of the country. Surely the time for solidarity wealth tax is now. Surely time for government to do everything that it can to stop illicit cash outflows in order to keep that money inside and to pay for a comprehensive social security system have now come. Surely government must now put its act together to ensure that the 35 to 40% that we lose in the procurement budget to corruption is now brought into the party to address the crisis of poverty and all of these other things that we've demanded in the past.
Okay, Duma Kubule, I mean, just from what Zwelinzima Vavi has just said, it goes without saying that there's going to have to be trade-offs here.
Vuyo, I would like to agree with Mr. Vavi. This is actually a very important document because South Africa will never be the same again after the events that happened in July and the second week in July in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal. We can't turn a blind eye. I mean, we have to confront poverty directly, as Martin Luther King said many years ago. So, so this document has sort of a stairway of social security. So you have social assistance This is the floor, the first floor of the social security system, where people don't make contributions towards their social security. Then you have social insurance, where people, the next floor, where people make contributions, and then you have voluntary social security, voluntary contributions that people make to top up. Now, I'm just addressing the whole issue of the social assistance floor. What the document says is that they want to bring an end to means tests in all the grant systems. So what that means is that we're going to have universal social security. That's an important recommendation. So we will have universal old age grant, universal child support grant, and they say that all the grants will converge around the basic income grant. So to explain what that means, so if it is at 1,268, as Isabel is saying, that means that the child support grant, which is 40% below the poverty line, should over time move towards the 1,268, towards us achieving. So what this system, what this addresses in terms of social assistance is this missing middle in our social security system. Our social security system currently caters for the people who are too old to work and the people who are too young to work. There's nothing in between for the people between 18 and 59. So if all the grants, if we have universal social assistance and they all converge around the basic income grant, depending on the transition period, it could be 3 years. I think we should have a fast transition towards this, 3 to 5 years. We could directly abolish poverty within 3 years or 5 years. Yeah.
David Roth, I mean, notwithstanding all these good things that this green paper seeks to suggest, that Duma has just so, eloquently highlighted, fact of the matter is that policy is a contested terrain. We may sit around here and the five of us may agree, but there are other people, powerful forces in society that are going to tear this thing apart and, point to problems with implementing them. And this one saying we should do that instead of that. Others saying, the government is not particularly efficient, there's corruption, and there's a whole lot of other things.
Yes, good evening to you and to the other panelists. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm afraid I'm the economist here, I'm the realist here, and I've got all the numbers here, and I'm afraid I've got some really bad news for all of you. Maybe just one or two comments. The one is that we all agree that we've got a huge unemployment problem, we've got a huge poverty problem and all that. And we need to put measures in place to support our fellow South Africans. So there are a couple of positives as far as this new green paper is concerned. And remember, this is only a green paper. Mm-hmm. There's still a long way to go before we get actual policy. This is a discussion document. But basically what it comes down to, and I can agree with that, is that we need to consolidate many of these social security systems in South Africa. Hopefully that will result in some cost saving, which is a good idea. No problem with that. The idea of mandatory savings is also not a bad idea. I can agree, I can go along with that. So I'm quite happy with that. But that is probably where the whole thing is going to end. Because in reality, if you look at all the suggestions here, what is primarily being suggested here is basically an increase in taxes on the existing taxpayers. So there will be an increase in taxes on the existing taxpayers. And I can promise you, I analyzed the fiscal accounts thoroughly, and it's basically impossible to increase taxes any further. That also means there will be an overall, and things like, for example, the private sector savings system that we have in South Africa, private sector pension funds as an example. And the most important aspect here is that government will get more involved in all sorts of things. There are many outstanding questions, like, for example, where will this fund be invested? And remember, there's all sorts of grand ideas on the requirements of the board members. They have to be people of integrity and all that. But that we have that people previously at Eskom, at South African Airways, and then now all the list simply goes on and on. So in simple terms, what's going to happen here, there will be a consolidation. The idea is to consolidate the social security systems in South Africa and to increase taxes in order to fund this. Now, I can promise you, this system as being proposed now will not be implemented in South Africa. It will not be implemented because we have a highly inefficient government that will not be able to implement it. That's the first point. Secondly, the tax base simply cannot afford this. The South African economy is bleeding jobs. The South African economy is simply not growing. And all those taxpayers, many of them are simply leaving the country. So the reality is It's all good and well to wish for all these wonderful things, but we simply do not have the money. We ran out of money. And I'm afraid what we're currently seeing over this idea here is another try from the government in trying to get hold of our private sector savings in the end as well. So good ideas, many of those ideas, and I can actually support some of those ideas in principle and in theory, but in practice, there's no way this kite is going to fly.
Isabel, you've been shaking your head there. But what I want to ask you is, isn't what Davi is raising, in fact, saying to all of us that perhaps, we need to strengthen this social compact that everyone is talking about so that everyone has a clear understanding of, one, the imperatives of having to do what this green paper seeks to do. But on the other hand, also understand that there's a price to pay. There are sacrifices to be made.
Thanks, Vuyo. And I always enjoy engaging with Davi because I think we do have diametrically opposed positions. Firstly, just to say that I've been part of the NEDLAC task team, which has been sitting for the last 6 years in the creation, crafting of this green paper. So it's not something that appeared overnight. And there have been various successions of research documents that we've commissioned that have gone into this. In fact, Davi, research that's been done by the private sector, which has come up with recommendations on which the green paper is based. And as you say, it is a discussion document. I think, Vuyo, that it is important for us to see what it is that our society is lacking. Duma talked about the missing middle. We have a social security system that is not based on the needs of a society in which more than half of adults are not working. So the question is, what do we do when we have an economy which is basically inactive? The idea of distributing cash, which is the currency of activity, in order to ensure that businesses are able to start and to flourish, and that people are able to be active in the circulation, both of currency, of identity, and of a stable society is crucial. So we need to look at this as going beyond the balance sheet. At this point in time, Duma is actually doing some work for my institute, looking at the multiplier effect. In other words, for every rand that is spent, how much money is generated for society, and in turn, the returns, whether it's through VAT or corporate income tax, in terms of the profits that are made and are fed back into the system, give us a positive multiplier. So instead of seeing what we have right now, which is that small amounts through social grants are going into communities, are being eked out in order to give bare existence, what the Green Paper's vision shows is a different society in terms of which, firstly, the multipliers of the state investment enable people through the circulation in township economies and other depressed economies to actually revitalize. But secondly, it also gives the state a huge leverage. So if we're saying a basic income grant, for instance, of 1,268 rand, with the state engaging with the private sector saying, how far can we stretch this? Because of our huge bargaining power to retailers, etc., seeing how we can ensure that that is used as a positive spin-off. And then the third thing that we need to consider as well is with this kind of activity in our communities, we can't actually talk about social cohesion until we ensure that everybody from the cradle to the grave is incorporated and is able to be productive. So I think that if we look back to other countries where we've had a major success, a departure from a recessive kind of economy shrinking, there's always been something major that has happened that has brought people, can we say, to their senses. I think right now, the activity, the protests that we had in July and the extent of the economic and also the social damage that happened as a result of that, that was people saying we can't actually continue without our needs being met. This is the opportunity. We know that the president is in favor of a basic income grant. We know that Minister Lindiwe Zulu has spoken out in favor of it, as Comrade Zwelinzima Vavi was saying, Zola Skweyiya did before that. We need to see this as an opportunity for us to actually correct what has not been happening in society for the past 24 years. And of course, there'll be naysayers, as Davi and others are, and we want to have those arguments brought out so that the policy can be strengthened in the implementation. But the time has come not for us to say, is this going to happen, but is to say, how can it happen optimally?
Now, Zwelinzima Mavavi, I mean, you know, as you were saying, I mean, Zola Square, may his soul rest in peace, never lived to see. I mean, things take so long. You know, I mean, we've been talking about this for more than 20 years now. And if you, I mean, know how piloting legislation through Parliament, how long it takes, you know, it's going to take years and years before this actually becomes a reality. The question then is, what do we do to fast track this, to find one another, and so that these things are done, or if they can't be done, we then decide what to do and the kind of country we want to live in. So what needs to be done now to make sure that this doesn't take another 20 odd years to become a reality? Zwelinzima Mavavi?
Oh, okay. Look, we've got to speed this discussion. Frankly, there's no need for elaborate discussion that is going to take another 20 years. We've been discussing this matter from 2002, as I was saying earlier, and we can't afford to waste another time because of the resistance from the Conservatives and the Treasury. I'm sorry, Davi, you belong to that team as well. We've got to move. I mean, we have been warning about a ticking time bomb. We've been warning about the power keg that can explode. Some parts of that is already happening. Every of our cities now is surrounded by squalor and a ring of fire. We saw the happenings of July. As I was already saying, we are the headquarters of protest action in the whole world. The price of doing nothing about these levels of poverty is what we've seen already can happen in this country in July. We can't afford to waste time. We've got to move this discussion immediately to the second gear. Let the white paper be introduced without any further delay. Let the legislation be introduced without delay. Let the current weaknesses that we are identifying, such as the fact that no worker can afford a 12% deduction in the context of the low wage scenario that we have tolerated for so long during apartheid, colonial era, and even during the 25, 26 years of democracy. And so we've got to address those weaknesses. Look at Vuyoman, we are not a poor country. I think this point has to be registered all the time. The IMF and the Citibank, when they look at our wealth beneath our soil and above, they rate us as the 5th wealthiest country in the world. The only problem in South Africa is that wealth is monopolized by a tiny minority of the citizens, whilst the overwhelming majority of the citizens have no wealth, have no property, have absolutely nothing, except that they are the face of poverty. These people are black, these people are young, they are women, and this proposal on the table on the comprehensive social security system is an attempt to begin to speak to those people more directly than we have done in the past. What we can't tolerate is that every policy that is pro-poor must take ages and ages of discussion that ends up nowhere. And yet every policy that favors the rich in society gets rushed like that, and before you know it is a legislation.
Okay.
There is money. South Africa's corporations were paying up to 52 cents in corporate taxes as late as in 1992. That corporate tax has been dropped to 27% now. SAFTU calls on the government to lift that corporate tax up in order to fund a comprehensive social security system.
Davi, I mean, I can see you like you're holding your head there. I mean, how would you do it? How would you do it? I mean, given the very real, fears and issues that everyone else is raising, while taking into account perhaps the other fears that you were raising? How else would you do it?
Yeah. You know, I'm listening to Isabel, and I'm listening to my good friend, Mr. Varvey. And you know, but they are just wrong. You can have your own opinion, but you can't have your own facts. Isabel, I'm very sorry to tell you this, but you simply do not understand economics. Now, if your idea is, for example, if your starting point is that there's a multiplier effect, if you spend more money, then it's going to boost the economy. So why don't we just spend 10,000, give 10,000 rand per month to everybody and multiply it even more? There must be a limit to these sort of things. Really, it's very difficult for me to debate, to talk about issues like that when we get fundamentally flawed arguments like the argument that you're using. Well, it's just not true. The same with Velenzima. And we've had many debates before. You know, your comment about taxes being low in South Africa, that is factually incorrect. You know, and let me give one example. You say company taxes have been coming down. Yes, the number has been coming down. But do you know that companies don't pay taxes in South Africa or anywhere in the world because companies always shift their total tax burden down to individuals? And individuals always pay all taxes. I promise you, if you increase taxes on companies, then the workers will be paid less, or the customers will be paying more, or the shareholders will be receiving less dividends. It's not the companies paying these taxes, as an example. And we need those companies in South Africa because they are the taxpayers, they are the employers, they are the wealth creators, they are the investors in a country, and they are running away. They're looking for other places to invest because South Africa is not a competitive investment destination anymore. That is the reality. If we look at the tax burden in South Africa for the last couple of years, it has been going up year after year after year. The state has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. Okay. The tax burden or the debt burden has become completely and totally unsustainable. Now, you can wish whatever you want to, and I agree we've got a poverty problem and we have an unemployment problem. But the only way to fix that is by growing the economy. And I'm afraid to say, organized labor is part of the problem because it is illegal to employ somebody if you pay them less than the minimum wage. Okay. And currently the state is actually paying people less than the minimum wage. Okay. Just 350 rand as an example. Okay. Those are the real issues. Now, we can wish whatever we want to, but if there's no money, there is no money. And the only solution to South Africa...
we're seriously run out of time. Okay, Tumakubule, I mean, you've been able to, I mean, you study stuff like across the world. You often come up with examples of how other jurisdictions deal with some of the problems that we are experiencing. Should we, or how do we deal with, you know, the implications for the tax system fears? How do we deal, you know, with the fiscal, you know, framework fears that people are having after on the back of these proposals?
Are you talking? Is it my question?
I'm not talking to
no, it's my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So now let me just say, I don't appreciate the patronizing lecturing we're getting from Davi. So I just want to tell you the actual facts, not your facts. Our country is not working. We've had a lost decade in terms of economic development, during which GDP per capita did not grow. That was the crisis before the crisis. Now, the crisis after the crisis, we've got overlapping public health, humanitarian, and economic crisis. Now, all the forecasts for the economy show that we will return to 2019 pre-pandemic levels by 2023. We're going to have a technical bounce this year and then revert to pre-pandemic growth afterwards. And then if you take into account population growth, we will reach 2019 GDP per capita in 2025. And then we're going to have a second lost decade. So what we're going to have is repeated cycles of social instability and political instability, and eventually the state will have to have repression on the poor people. So I'm saying we've got to get out of that. So it's about how we sequence the changes that are going to get our country out of this crisis. So number one, the quickest way throughout the world, whether Davi likes it or not, there have been 734 cash transfers system programs in 186 countries. The stimulus packages globally were 17 billion rands. 16 billion rands, dollars, sorry, 17% of world GDP. So we need a stimulus for our economy. So in the short term, we have to do what every other country has done. We need to have a cash transfer, the social security floor. There have been 15 studies, which I can guarantee you, Davi has never looked at a single of them. I've looked at all of them, and they've explained how we can pay, how the can work in terms of the basic income grant. So we need a short-term boost in terms of cash consumption. And as Isabel was saying, I've been reading studies about Africa, in Ethiopia, 15 African countries. There are multipliers, Davi. Ethiopia is 2.5. Ghana, 2.5. Kenya, there was one where they gave $1,000 to 10,500 families, and the multiplier was 2.5. So what I'm trying to say is this is not charity. This is to grow our economy and give it a short-term boost. Then the second thing we have to do, you have to expand the public works program. You have to invest in the economy. And then I can guarantee you, we just have to correct one thing you said at the beginning. You said that the 10%,
I've got to stop you there,
sorry,
Duma.
the 10%, yeah, sorry, just quickly. The 10% that is not going to pay for the basic income grant. So what I'm trying to say, in terms of the second floor, which is the private sector system, in terms of pensions and health, I want to see a coordinated discussion around this thing, because private markets, as Davi knows, they cherry pick prime customers. So the private pension systems leave out 6 million people. The private healthcare leaves out 83% of the population. So all I would want to see for that floor, Vio, is that let's coordinate those discussions around national health insurance and let's have one system to sort that out here.
Isabel Fry, thanks to all of you for coming through. Unfortunately, we have seriously run out of time, but thank you so much for this conversation. I wish we had more time, and that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks very much for watching. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.